And now we have Auckland Transport, after waiting so patiently. Oh, apologies, and we also missed extraordinary business. Is there any extraordinary business today? No, there is not. Yeah. Cool. Greg and... Yes. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher.
I thought there was the matter of the Rahui on Waiheke, and we were giving, some of us saw it as a matter of extraordinary urgency.
Apologies, Councillor Fletcher, that may have just come to Councillor Coombe and I. There was a discussion from staff that it didn't fit the criteria, so it will have to come to governing body, just with the time.
So just for 2 weeks, we'll put it on to governing body in 2 weeks' time. It's still within the submission time frame, so we will still meet the fisheries requirements there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we have our CCO quarterly update, and that's where we're hoping that each CCO, and thankfully Auckland Transport has agreed to come to us to present what they are doing in the climate change space. So I have Greg and Kathy, if you would like to introduce yourselves and your roles, and then your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Greg Nelson, Head of Transport Sustainability at Auckland Transport.
I'm Dr. Kathy Biebelman, the Environmental Specialist for Auckland Transport.
And we can't compete with Dr. Rod Carr, so expectations have been set quite high. Yeah, won't even try, and we're just before your lunch as well, so just bear with us. Today, what we're going to talk to, we'll be very specific about the scope here. So there'll be two bits. Kathy in a moment will talk about environment, what we're doing around water quality, greening the network, biodiversity and waste minimisation. My area around climate change, I'm going to focus specifically around our corporate and network operations, and network operations are street lights, public transport facilities, emissions from renewals in our construction projects, and some of the climate change risk work that we're doing. Now you'll see the not covering there. That is because there's already been lots of discussions within the planning committee about RLTP funding, and I'm definitely well aware of last week's discussions, and we've got a very long list of questions from councillors to be responded to. So we're not trying to avoid that topic, but for today we want to keep the scope in the specific area. There may be questions at the end, which we're happy to answer around the areas that we're not covering. But just to be clear, we're keeping it relatively contained because we know there's conversations happening elsewhere, which are more appropriate forums. So with that, I'll hand over to Kathy.
Thank you. I want to just cover briefly and at a high level the breadth of environmental work that Auckland Transport is involved in and where we're heading with that, looking at water, biodiversity, our green infrastructure, our waste minimisation primarily at this point. Focusing first on the plan that we've in progress of developing. An environmental action program is looking to establish targets in 5 main areas, and we're looking to establish this year and collect the data to support key performance indicators for those. We have done that through Hui with Mana Whenua. Auckland Transport, I'm sure you're aware, has regular hui with 19 iwi groups in Auckland, and I've presented this work to them at the early stages of the program 3 or 4 times, and interacting with them on an ongoing basis. So they are fully supportive and involved as we develop these targets and KPIs. Looking at the work that we're doing in terms of water quality, there are a number of components. One of them is looking at our unsealed roads, and I'm sure you're familiar with the sediment load that runs off those roads and impacts on our waterways and harbours. We have an unsealed roads improvement framework that has been recently developed, and a program of work that comes through with funding under that each year. Last year we managed to seal immediately out of COVID lockdown. We're kind of proud we even got got the metal across to Waiheke so quickly. About 1.4 kilometres of road to protect a giant kakapu population there, and we are continuing to collaborate with council staff, particularly in Healthy Waters, on the Mahurangi and Kaipara sediment reduction programs. And there is an ongoing program of treatments available, not just seal extension, but other road sealing treatments that we can do on these roads to reduce the sediment load. We're looking at water quality from our urban network. We have been busy mapping our high traffic volume roads, overlaying that with our stream network and looking at culverts and mapping where we do have treatment devices and where we don't. The picture on the left there, the red dots, are where we have high volume vehicle roads. We're talking 25,000+ vehicles per day, and intersections with streams or opportunities where runoff from that road can discharge untreated, and that forms our priority areas for treatment as those roads are redeveloped or improved. And then you can see on the right hand side where we're starting to map the new treatment devices that are being installed by developers. There are some challenges around these, in that on very low volume vehicle roads with low contaminant loads, we have a proliferation of treatment devices, and that is going to start moving through our OPEX and maintenance budget in terms of how do we keep these maintained going forward. So there's works in progress on both sides. One is treating existing busy roads, one is looking at how we manage the runoff from our growing urban developments. We're also looking at water consumption, and there are a number of components here. So we're looking at how we use procurement to drive our contractors, particularly our maintenance and construction contractors, to use non-potable water for areas like dust suppression and drilling where they need to. So rather than wasting potable water or drinking water on pouring it on the road to keep the dust down, we'd prefer to use a non-potable or rain tank resource. We're also looking at how we can use rainwater for toilet flushing, etc. at our bus and rail depots and facilities. And we're looking through the drought over the last year in terms of managing our bus cleaning and washing facilities to save water there. So these will build into our water consumption targets. We're very keen to green our network. Looking overseas, there are a number of cities and countries who are well ahead of Auckland in terms of a green network. We know that greening our network helps manage heat stress. It improves cooling of the environment, particularly for pedestrians. It reduces stormwater runoff and improves the quality of that runoff. It improves biodiversity through the green planting, and it also helps, of course, absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. So it's a win-win all round, actually. I'm working on a project at the moment to look at how we can get green roofs on our bus shelters, and looking to pilot that soon. The ones shown there are from Utrecht in the Netherlands, so no, they're not ours yet. Getting there. The green walls, I'm looking at how we can utilise our car park spaces for green walls and green roofs, and use those to showcase what can be done better. That is the car park in Fanshawe Street. No, it doesn't look like that at the moment, but we've got to aim for something, small things to start with. And of course rain gardens, which we already have a fair few in the city, but we can do an awful lot more. We're also looking at waste minimisation, and we currently have a number of projects going on at various facilities. AT has released in the last 12 months an aggregate specification that supports the reuse of recycled aggregate. This has been developed in conjunction with Watercare and Council's solid waste management team, because we want to remove the barriers or myths, if you like, around the perception of the quality of that recycled material. We've done that, and we've put together a specification that now enables its use in the Auckland region. We're also looking at driving the use of that through procurement of, in particular, our maintenance and construction contracts, so that we'd like to start setting some minimum targets so that we're actually reusing crushed concrete when we lift a footpath, for example. And looking lastly at biodiversity, we've got two aspects to it. One is the legislation that became active last September through the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and the requirements for fish passage. This impacts on AT, particularly around culverts, and we have an established work program now to map our culverts, map and overlay that with where fish passage is important, and we're now investigating where our culverts are an impediment to that and looking to resolve that. The picture down the bottom is from Blackwell's Drift on Great Barrier Island, and that's currently programmed to be improved, and that will improve the fish passage through that area. The other area that we're working in terms of biodiversity is looking at how we can use our road corridors in particular as a contribution to the green network in Auckland, and we have worked with mana whenua to develop planting guidelines that are appropriate in the different areas of Auckland, and we'll be rolling those out soon. So that is a quick overview of some of the environmental work we're doing. We're looking to capture that in an Environment Action Program, and we'll be taking that up to our committees shortly for sign-off. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just, move through to the climate change section. So I'll touch again briefly on scope, then give you an idea of how the performance of the organisation has been in the last 3 years, then look at what we're doing around corporate and network operations, what we're doing around construction, and then talk very briefly about the work we've started on understanding climate change risks. So for today's scope, so own operations, which is a term I'll use further on, is we're looking at within AT's direct control, so from an emissions point of view. So it's our corporate activities, the very minor stuff, our vehicle fuel, travel, network operations, which is street and traffic lights, public transport facilities. So what keeps a network moving from an operational point of view. We also look at supply chain. So supply chain we break into two areas, one which is covered because it's out of scope today, but the two areas are construction. So construction and renewals work, so building new infrastructure. Then the other area is public transport operators, and you've heard about electric buses in the past, and electric ferries. And the last area, which I won't touch on, but just to make you understand how we kind of break the areas up, is the road transport system. So that's the users of the road transport system. So that's where the RLTP comes in and discussions you've had last week and questions you've posed on that. Just to give an idea of scale, and you'll know this, key thing to note here is the size of the bubbles. So the road transport system, roughly 3.4 megatons of carbon per year. Our public buses out there at the moment, 96,000 tonnes, almost 2%. Our public ferries, so those dots are in relative size. So the intent here is not to show how unimportant buses are, how unimportant public ferries are, but it's just to show you that AT is focusing what can we do about the road transport system, because we know that's where the biggest impact will be. Our public trains get even smaller again. Then what today is, which is talking about the small stuff, which is the key message I want to make today, to make you not think we're forgetting about the big stuff, is there is actually a very, very small dot there for our corporate emissions, and a slightly big one for our network operations. So today I'll take you through what we're doing in those areas. The other side, the big stuff, RLTP, the planning committee, all of those discussions which are happening elsewhere. And also to the right-hand side, the road transport system is also where the Climate Change Commission is talking about as well. Construction renewals, we're still working on what those numbers actually are. I'll talk about that a bit more later on. So own operations, so the own operations, the street lights, the traffic lights, running the network, and our corporate emissions. It's been working its way down. Key thing to note for corporate, it shrunk a lot last year. COVID was the main reason driving that, because people couldn't travel, our office was closed. So that will be, so the trend looks nice, but keep COVID in mind. What you do notice for the network operations, COVID did not really have an impact. The street lights were still on. Public transport facilities were going for almost all the way through lockdown, so we don't see much change there. The reduction is really coming from LED replacements on some of our street lights. Oopsie, next one. So we have some targets in place that were approved by the board last year. The key one for the context of what we're talking about today is our operational emissions target. And that is to by 2030, halve our emissions of corporate activities and our assets, so by 2030. So we've called it operational emissions. I know it's a bit confusing. We've got own operations mentioned before. The deliberate intention here is we want to cover the things that we can directly control. So corporate and assets that we own. So what's different here is we add on trains as well. They're our own trains. We make the decision on to make them electric. So our target is around corporate activities and assets. And the thing to stress, because we don't want people to think that we're focusing on the little stuff, so those two add up to 0.5% of transport emissions. So it complements work that we're doing around reducing emissions from the transport system. So a key word there is complement. So what we're doing, very quickly, what we're doing around our own operations, so our approach is reduce energy use and switch to more efficient technologies. So what we did from 2016 to 2019, so this is very much bread and butter sustainability type work, but we stripped out 6 gigawatts of energy use, so around 400 homes for a year. Just be more efficient, lighting upgrades and things like that. Not sexy stuff by any stretch, but stuff that makes a difference. What we're looking at now, we will continue to upgrade our LED lights for street lights. At the moment, we've got through about 66% of them. We have an SOI target to hit 87% by financial year 22-23, which we're on top of. We've still got some PT facilities convert to LED for their lighting, and we're also looking at how much better can we compare our different sites to make sure they're working efficiently. So that stuff's pretty standard. It's hard to compete with Kathy's picture of green roofs. What the closest we can get to is, okay, we can improve our design requirements, but we're also looking at how can we have solar generation on more of our sites. So we have to compete with space for Kathy for her green roofs. So one spot for the green roof, one spot for the solar panel. Okay, for renewals and construction, Kathy touched on this a bit from a waste management point of view. So the approach we're taking here, so with our contractors, is wastewater materials and energy management requirements in our construction contracts. We've had a few contracts that we've piloted with at the moment. We're still building our intelligence around what are the best sort of contracts and how to have sinking targets in terms of requirements there. So key actions, so piloting requirements, shrinking targets. So Kathy's leading one area in our road renewals. We have a better idea of what the impacts are and just making it tougher and tougher each year for our suppliers. Collecting data, engaging with our contractors, and from a big project point of view, our Eastern Busway project, which the additional stages we're starting now, is using industry sustainability rating tools that keep us quite disciplined in making sure that we really stick to reducing emissions as much as possible. Okay, future opportunities are pretty much just repeating what I've said. It's having those requirements and contracts. Then very quickly, from a climate change risk point of view, we started work late last year about how we identify and prioritise risks. We've been working very closely with the rest of Council to make sure we've got a common approach here. We've been identifying and assessing risks. We're looking very broadly. It's not just to our roads and to our bus stations and train stations. What will be the risks also to our customers, to our staff and to safety? What we're working through at the moment is how we prioritise those. So there's a whole lot of risks climate change will impact on us between now and the end of the century. We're looking at what will be the biggest impacts between now and 2050 and then the second half of the decade to prioritise what we should be focusing on initially. So that's working very closely with Council and other CCOs. once we've got that prioritisation done, and we take that to our board in July this year for them to be comfortable with what our prioritisation is and get their feedback, then we start to work on how do we actually adapt. So we have the priority areas, priority geographies, then we get to work on what needs to be done, because there's a lot of work to be done to get ourselves ready for the impacts of climate change. So in summary, very quickly, mitigation, we've got targets around our own operations. We need to be we're working on being more efficient and then using on-site generation. That's the next step there. Renewals and construction, build better, make our contractors have stricter requirements on our contractors, and then adaptation, getting our prioritisation sorted, and then develop adaptation plans over time. That's it. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Any questions from members? Councillor Newman, did you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you very much. The existing 378 bus service now extended around Karaka Lakes on Sunday the 24th of January, and Councillor Dalton and I were there to celebrate that, and good to see the expansion of the service in that outer suburban community. I'm quite interested in the reuse, the recycling of aggregate for use back in the network. If you go to the Auckland Botanic Gardens, the old cladding facade from Albert Street is now used for the pathway in the Botanic Gardens. It's beautiful. I would assume, though, that it's quite tricky in relation to the reuse of aggregate, that the specifications around what the product is, the state of it, how it will be used, mitigating risk, health and safety is a real challenge. So can you expand more on the issues that you face, and as well as that, are there any consenting issues that you need to overcome?
Yes, I can. It's been a 2-year journey in collaboration with the solid waste team at Council and Watercare. There were a lot of myths we had to bust around the use of recycled aggregate, particularly in the road corridor, which we have jurisdiction over. Watercare had concerns around, oh goodness, what if it was contaminated and damaged my pipes? And Council wanted to know, well, if we had a better use for that aggregate, perhaps we should have it, or access to it. Or if we're knocking down a building and we're crushing a lot of concrete, perhaps we should be using that somewhere sensibly. So there was a myth-busting process first, and then we set out to spell out in the specification what quality assurance is required from a supplier, and then if they can meet that quality assurance requirements and the specifications of the aggregate, certain particle size, for example, or dust levels, whatever, then we will accept it within the road corridor. It's not onerous. We want to be enabling as far as we can. And the second part to that was that we've been working with the aggregate supply industry and the recycling suppliers in the Auckland region. So initially, there was a recognition, I think, that virgin aggregate material is in limited supply. It also, with the congestion on our roads now, trucks taking virgin aggregate from quarries that are on the edge of Auckland into a construction site often only get to make perhaps 2 trips a day, which is limiting the supply chain. So we're working with people like Green Vision, Green Gorilla, that kind of thing, who through our procurement contracts, where we can mandate a small percentage use of recycled aggregate, it gives them certainty that if they were to stockpile aggregate pulled out of another demolition project, that there would be a supply need for that going forward. So in the first year of our procurement contracts, we have specified, for example, for maintenance, maybe use 5% of the aggregate in your maintenance works should be recycled in source. Next year, we will look to step that up, perhaps 8%, and then maybe 10% and 12%, and every year step that up, because the supply chain side needs time to build capacity. They also need that long-term certainty that there are contracts in place that will mandate the use of it. So actually, beating the contamination myths was the easy part. It's building that supply chain on an ongoing basis with industry that takes time, and that's where we're heading.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora both. I appreciate the topics that you're not wanting to mention, but it does perpetuate the perception that AT is operating in silos and it's not taking a holistic approach, which we absolutely know climate change, the environment, they can't all be separated into these nice boxes. But so without talking to those topics, I am keen to know how your roles are integrated into the rest of the organisation. And I ask that particularly, Kathy, in your role around the greening, because it's been a 10-year struggle with Auckland Transport around renewals, where, from a local board, we've had the funding, we've had the will, we have asked, as a local board chair, multiple opportunities for adding trees to footpath renewals, swales. We were asking for the downtown car park to have a green roof, 10 years ago. So I appreciate your coming in there and got a big job, but I just would like to, particularly maybe if you could explain around the renewal space, and also, sorry, I didn't capture your name. Greg, sorry, the names aren't in any of the material we've got, but Greg, how your role is integrated within the wider organisation so that we're not looking at climate change in this silo. Thank you.
Definitely. I am delighted to say that I've been on staff for 2 years, and I'm pedalling furiously. So successes to date have been that in the Auckland Transport Business Plan, we now have a section in there, or an outcome, that is for the sustainable use and renewable use of the transport network. And under that business outcome is all the green infrastructure, the recycled aggregates, and the things that you're talking about. Now that that's been mandated at that top level, we're then able to put in place the Environment Action Plan that I'm working on this current financial year that will start driving those changes through the projects. Coming to the renewal space, Auckland Transport went to the market late last year, and we're currently working through a tender process for the central and south maintenance contracts. They are significantly large contracts, and we have set sustainability and environment related targets into those contracts, and they are delivered through key reportable areas, or KRAs, with KPIs attached to them, and beneficial outcomes for both parties when they're delivered. So yes, green roofs on car parks, we all definitely want them. The parking guys within AT have been working with Healthy Waters. We have a partnership to deliver them. Unfortunately, COVID knocked the budget, so it slowed it down slightly, but they're coming. The delay has been the seismic upgrade requirements for some of the car parks. So I have been reluctant to put green roofs and green walls on those structures until they've been upgraded, because I didn't want them ripped down for that work. But it's definitely coming. It's part of the plan.
Thank you. Member Wilson. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I sit within Planning and Investment team, reporting through to Jenny Chapman. So my role, so you saw the picture before, is showing the 3 areas of own operations, supply chain, and transport system. So my role covers all of those. From an integration point of view, the best way to explain it is we had set up in July, August last year, a steering group that covers across environment and climate change. And that steering group includes many of the executive leadership team. And that's our main forum for where we share our plans about what we want the organisation to do across environment and climate change and across all the climate change areas. And also in that area, it's also where I provide input into the RLTP process as well, and the work that's going on behind that, and also been involved in some of the ATAP development too.
Member Wilson.
Kia ora koutou. We've had a range of presentations that have been very, very informative and in the main very positive, and I add this to the list of very informative and positive. Thank you very much, Greg and Dr. Kathy. I want to go with the positive, which I love to go with if I can find them, and that is the consultation, and I did note that throughout all of that, and I know it's quite difficult, or it's said to be very difficult, but you're very confident, Dr. Kathy, which pleased me immensely that you had that covered. In the role that you both play on behalf of AT, it would be difficult in the climate change arena to see the positives, given transport is one of those things that needs to be addressed. What I also like and would like to continue in the positive vein is that, as has been spoken previously, concentrate on what is being done well. And you have expressed that well in terms of the presentation there, and clearly there's a lot more to be done. And we continue to say that. So I'm staying with, appreciated the presentation, appreciated that there's still work to be done. There was sufficient there that gave me some assurance that you were looking at how that could be measured and how AT could configure in terms of the wider council. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
To compliment you on that, that in a morning where certain things stand out, and you know our previous speakers made a number of statements that stood out, was your graphic there to do with Auckland's emissions in the road transport system. That is pretty stark, and I say that because sitting around this table in particular, you might be forgiven for thinking, well, if we clear up the buses in downtown and get a couple of electric ferries, job done, dudes. Well, clearly that's not going to cut it, and those little pinheads really drive that point home. I've got two questions. My first question, it comes in light of the comments made by Dr. Carr about context matters for mobility, and for mobility is inherently local. And I know you're presenting to us as a whole. I think what would be perhaps useful going forward in this whole climate change world is to get some more local examples. So to break it down, to break Auckland down a bit, to have a couple of case studies of Papakura, Whangaparā, or whatever, about how people using our transport system can reduce their emissions, especially in light of this very good graphic here that shows where the real challenge is to be made. So I just made that general comment. The question I have goes to those emission profiles. Now, in parts of my ward where I travel, literally every second or third vehicle you see on the road is a large SUV. I mean, you can play a little game if you want, if you're travelling north or not, and just count them. And at times it's as stark as that. In terms of those vehicles' emission profile, and a number of them are recently late models, how do they compare to your normal car, like in terms of what CO2 they're emitting?
Highly variable is probably the best way to put it. So it really comes down to where that vehicle has come from. If it's a European vehicle and it's meeting European standards, their level of efficiency will be relatively high. If it's come out of another market, its efficiency will be extremely low. Particularly we're getting more imports out of China and India. Their amount of carbon per kilometre is astronomically high. So not all big SUVs are necessarily bad. Some are more efficient than others, and you're getting more electric ones. But as a general rule, the bigger it is, the more it will pollute.
Thank you, that's a good answer. And our communication crusade going forward, that might be a point that's worth making at some point as more and more people start buying big SUVs, and particularly if they're getting them from these markets.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And we have given that feedback on the clean car standard and the feedback, I think last year or the year before now. And thankfully, I think it was last week or the week before, government have finally announced the clean car standard, which is probably too far away, in my opinion, 5 years, but will help make sure we're only importing certain emission standard, and we don't want to be the last cab off the rank in that situation. So that's at least a step forward on that. Member Wilcox.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm quite heartened to see the kaupapa there for the water quality in the Kokopu, 1.4 kilometres of road. I suppose I want to ask, on the other side of that, what are we doing for the air quality? Just having been with some whānau whose house, because they live next to a sealed road, is continually dusted up. So I'm trying to get, this is environment, not so much climate, but it is environment. So I'm trying to understand what we're doing with air quality as far as people like that are concerned.
Definitely. The unsealed road network has long been acknowledged as generating dust, and the faster the cars or vehicles travel down it, the more dust is generated. So the unsealed road framework that we have developed in the last 12 months and has just been signed off now has a whole lot of different measures in it that we can apply, different treatments to these roads to reduce and manage the dust load that impacts on the air quality in particular of rural residents. So it used to be that Auckland Transport had a seal extension program, and we had a list of 100 to 200 roads, and you'd pass away before your road reached the top of that list, given the funding constraints and the cost of a full seal extension. What we've done now is taken about half a dozen plus different treatments that are available to apply to those unsealed roads for different reasons, and we can roll those out a lot more cost effectively, which means we can deliver the environmental and health outcomes along with maintenance, etc., on those unsealed roads more quickly. So we're just putting a program for that together at the moment. So I'm hopeful that that will address some of the more dusty roads that are impacting residents.
And that sounds great, because I mean that's the issue now, is that this family now, there's a whole community developing around them, and it's not just one car, it's like continuous cars now.
Yes, so we're looking at how we prioritise those sections of road and the number of vehicles per day, the number of dwellings, whether they're residential or commercial, in that area or within 50 metres of the road, are key factors that we now consider for in terms of how we prioritise those roads for treatment. The environment is another one, so proximity to a direct receiving environment where the runoff generates sediment burden to that waterway. That's also another factor we're considering that we weren't able to under the constraints of that seal extension program previously.
So you're seeking advice from mana whenua and
yes,
local iwi
we've
on
involved
these?
that through my water quality work and the Environment Action Program. That was established right back over 12 months ago now, where we started working with mana whenua in terms of what were the key areas that we needed to cover off and what we wanted those to look like. Yeah.
So, Chair, I would like to see this formula once it's created, and I think the committee would be interested to see that too, as an environmental issue.
Yes, I'm sure we can, maybe after the RLTP and ATAP, so then that is, I know
Definitely.
it's difficult for you guys to comment on in the stage it's in, but after that it would be good to have those sorts of more road and project focused and how that works in, so
Definitely can do
that'd
that.
be cool. But also I think that Councillor Sayers is quite obviously interested in this, and he's met with staff on this, so it could also mean a separate briefing for you, Member Wilcox, as well, because it is quite an extensive piece of work. Thank you. I don't have any questions because I think that everyone is ready for a quick break. But I thank you both for coming in, and there's a lot of things in there that I think the public and also us don't know that's going on. So it's good to see these things highlighted. My small comment, and it follows on from Councillor Pipacoom's question, is just, and it's my question to everyone the last for a number of years, is around how we use those renewal budgets better. Over time, I know it's like for like, but over time we've initiated safety improvements as part of that, so that's technically not like for like. So I think over time we need to be having an automatic, stormwater improvement, potentially cycleway, potentially extending footpaths and tree planting, things like that would just come automatically. So those huge budgets that we don't necessarily have operational or decision making over just automatically bring those climate benefits. So if there's any conversations you're in, I would love for you to have those with your teams. But do I have a mover to move? Thanks. Councillor Cooper, seconder. Councillor Collins. Thank you very much for coming in, and have a good rest of your day. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. And sorry to those staff members who have turned up. Again, we're going to pop off to lunch for half an hour. We'll be back here at 2:07. We will be back here at 2:07.